Hello and welcome to the M Word. My name is Lavinia and I'm the founder and director of the M Word, and I have my lovely research assistant Sue Millington, who is a very new member of our team, but just we have been so lucky to get her because she's so efficient at helping us with lots of information, lots of data collection, and is just a very knowledgeable individual, both as a parent and as a professional. Now today it's mega exciting because it's the very first of our Unearthing, and I didn't choose the name, Sue did, because she's just that kind of individual, very creative and things. So welcome, Sue. Thank you so much for all your hard work, because I know you've got masses of information today. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Unearthing, how we came up with the idea for our viewers?
Yes, thank you. So it's all about what we can uncover. I like to go on a project, and often those projects tend to be around autism and mental health. It's become my passion, and so to have a podcast or a web chat about this sort of thing is great. And it's all about finding out the facts as well as using people's experiences, your clients with the M Word, my experiences, our family's experiences in and around autism and mental health, and to just help parents and families out there to feel that they have some control and power over what they do, especially with schools and services. And so we're going to be thinking about topics that are really relevant, and there's nothing more relevant at the moment than the problem with school attendance that has come.
So that's what we're going to explore today.
Yeah.
Okay. So Sue's got a bit of an agenda that she's going to guide us through, and this is part of some of the research that she has been doing frantically over the last week. And there are some pieces of information that you might recognize because of the different social platforms that you might have gone on to, or you might have even joined us in a poll, because I do believe you've got some stats for that, right? But we'll go through this, and my job is to keep us on target of time because she's been so good. She's got loads of information. So, Sue, over to you. What are you going to tell us about first?
Yeah, so it became obvious to the media. They picked it up fairly recently, certainly this last month, that we have a problem with our young people's mental health, that the COVID crisis has obviously not helped with school attendance, and various charities and organisations have noted an increase in school attendance difficulties. And there was a recent letter from the Secretary of State to school leaders. Because obviously he's new to the role, he's wanting to put his mark on this new role. And his letter mentioned some key points, which I picked up on. The first one being that he wanted to focus on resetting the approach to attendance and to make maximising school attendance a priority, which is taking advantage of the government's proposal for a recovery programme. And he said in this letter that teachers and school leaders were in a unique position to spot the various issues that can contribute to absence. And, you know, in this deep dive that I've done, there are so many issues. You know, it's not a cut and dry, oh, it's about refusal, it's about truancy. No, that's not the case at all. And one positive from this letter that I gleaned is that he emphasises the relationships that school leaders hold with pupils and families, and that their relationships are vital to reaching resolution. And he did say that there has to be a robust and joined up approach. Well, I latched on to the last thing of it being robust and joined up, because it's not. The truth is, reality is that it's not joined up, that it depends on where you are in the country. There's this postcode lottery. There's this whole competitiveness between mainstream schools, especially in secondary schools, to show their success as a school using attendance statistics. And, this is the pressure that schools are under, is to get bottoms on seats, literally.
And we're forgetting about the Ofsted as well, aren't we? Putting pressures on the school with target performancing, aren't we? With getting Ofsted to insisting that the attendance is a key priority, and schools can be failed and charged, can't they, for not getting attendance? So yeah, sorry, keep going.
No, absolutely. I mean, Ofsted is a factor, definitely, and so schools are in a really difficult position, because not only has the pandemic affected young people and families, it's affected the school staff. And, it has been really stressful, extra stress. And so I think for the start of this discussion, we need to think about the statistics, which are stark, they're really, really stark. But that is the truth of the matter, is that, there are lots of young people out there, sadly, really struggling with school. And
we'll come back to that, won't we, with looking at some of the statistics that you and I have got collectively as well. So let's go on to your next subject, because you've been very good about going and investigating two major social platforms with other work. What did you find?
Yeah, so I joined a community group. It's called Not Fine in School, because my son has had difficulties in attending school, and we deregistered, and he's currently not in college. We did start college, and so I joined this community group. Not Fine in School was set up by Beth Bodycoat, because I think herself, she was affected, her family was affected, and it's now got an incredible 20,000 plus membership. That it's just crazy, those statistics. More and more families are finding her, and she's a really useful resource, Beth.
And she's very proactive. She's very proactive, and she's doing PhD research herself, isn't she?
Absolutely. And so I've found her to be a mine of information. She's got useful articles and reports, all in and around mental health and school attendance. And yes, they are working in collaboration with Square Peg, and Square Peg was set up as a community interest group. It is run by Ellie Costello and Fran Morgan, and together they have been really putting word out there about school attendance difficulties. They have become a face on the media. But the statistics that I gleaned just from going on Not Fine in School for one day, I just looked at the posts to see, what was impacting young people and their mental health. And the majority of people who cannot go to school, young people who cannot go to school, have mental health difficulties, anxiety being high, and autism and ADHD being a big factor as well. I have also found out that Ellie Costello has collated figures, and 772,000 children currently are struggling with attendance, and they are persistently absent. And she has cited that academic pressure is a primary driver for causing mental ill health in our young people. So it's no coincidence that a lot of those people who are accessing not fine in school are autistic. You know, the young people are autistic.
Yeah.
They have a diagnosis, or they're certainly on the pathway to diagnosis. And ADHD is 50% of that, on average, it seems. And other conditions like dyslexia, depression, they factor as well. And that I was just amazed in the number of posts in one day, just 24 hours, that 10 of those posts, they said, the parents said that their child had an autism diagnosis. 4 of those were PDA, pathological demand avoidant. 4 of those suffered with chronic anxiety. One of those parents said that their child had PTSD about school, you know, trauma from school.
Trauma. Yeah.
And yes, it's stark.
It is stark.
You know, just in one day. And that's the people accessing not fine in school. You know, you can multiply that a lot, can't you, from those that aren't aware of not fine in school, because it is a network of support for those families.
So then you changed angle, I understand, because you were then looking at other statistical stuff.
So I looked at the media. Bear with me. And I saw that there was a recent BBC report that said anxiety, depression, and self-harm are on the rise amongst our young people, sadly, that GPs were reporting more suicides, more attempted suicides, and more serious self-harm.
Yeah.
The NSPCC has seen a 35% increase in people contacting their childline, anxiety being a top concern from those young people.
Yeah.
The Children's Society said in the last 3 years that mental health problems have increased by half. And young people are finding difficulty talking to GPs and seeking more and more support online, which is a bonus of COVID as well, that there are so much more of these services available online for young people.
Yeah.
But 3/4 of those young people said that they are not getting the help they need. So they're feeling really isolated in that, which is hard.
That sounds even higher than what we've already had in the, you know, public domain or the news, because although they're firing statistics of that, actually over 3/4 is a new figure, I feel, from what I can recall of, you know, when it's announced in the news. So that's staggering, isn't it?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah. GPs have added in the issue of social media,
of course,
which is always a contentious topic, that there are more young people staying up late on their devices, and this obviously affects sleep. So that was a concern of the GPs. I also found from YouthWorks, which is a counselling drop-in service, that the numbers have doubled in the last 2 years of 16 to 24-year-olds displaying extreme levels of anxiety. So that, again,
which is interesting, given that we've had lockdown.
Yeah.
You know, you'd expect the numbers to go down with the lockdown in some respects, because of, you know, obviously we've had restrictions going into education, but also we've had lots of people worrying about COVID, but just that general progression, isn't it, of mental ill health is alarming, to say the least, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, our young people have been hit hard by the pandemic.
Yeah.
Students certainly as well. You know, I've got a student in my family, my eldest, and I know the impact it's had on him, you know, and before the pandemic, he did not struggle with anxiety. He certainly felt, you know, low mood because he's not been able to do the things that he would normally be able to do. So certainly it's a factor. Also, this has affected, obviously, families in deciding what is best for their child. If they are showing anxiety, certainly about going to school. And so it's not surprising that there is a rise in more families deregistering their children and taking up home education.
Yeah. I suppose as well, if we think about agencies or statutory agencies, like, for example, CAMS and community paediatrics, although there has been literally a grind to a halt, particularly with the very first lockdown, where none of the statutory agencies were willing to see clients. And so it literally put a hold on the queues right around the country. And by the second lockdown, and certainly the third, there was that understanding that there was a bit more of a trickle, but still, obviously, there had been this enormous grinding to a halt, with people waiting normally sort of like 18 months to sort of like 2.5 years, to now, of course, being put back in the queue to being even longer. But also the fact that we know that CAMS and community paediatrics are very slow to monitor mental health. They're incredibly slow in diagnosing, or at least screening and diagnosing for autism and ADHD. So that will have had a major implication as well, won't it? And, you know, obviously we can talk about that a bit more as we go through, but certainly there is an awful lot of information from different perspectives, different agencies that are impacting. It's not a clear cut, as you said at the beginning, as to why young people are not attending school or struggling to attend school. So I think that's been beautifully done with your stats, because that's really reiterating it's not clear cut that the Secretary of State had tried to put in the letter. Maybe he's watching, maybe he'll think, oh, might need to take that on board.
But it is also, you know, we know that we need to have a village. You know, every child, there is that famous saying, you know, needs to be raised with the village. And of course, the pandemic highlighted how, you know, cut off we were socially. Yeah. And from services, like you say, you know, there are many families out there utterly dependent and reliant on those services. You know, the more complex their conditions.
Yeah. So moving on then, obviously we have got you kind of helping us understand how it is outside there, but bringing it home, closer to home, much closer to home. The M word, believe it or not, I know I'm very busy doing screenings, mental health assessment screenings and EHCP reports, and of course the therapy, but I also do the audits, lucky me. But it's a really fascinating area of interest, and Su, thank goodness, has really come at the right time, because it was beginning to get quite overwhelming with the amount of audits that I've been trying to do, and she's going to be helping me a lot more going forward with that. But we did a very, very small section for this program today, looking at it. So I'm just kind of going to go through that now. And this is really, for me, a bit of an eye-opener, because of course I've been seeing lots and lots of individuals, but obviously it's not until you put the data together that you begin to realize that your hunches were right, but also how much of an impact that shows on young people and families. Now, like I said to you, I've only done a very small segment. So between August 2020 to July 21, out of 31 clients who have surnames beginning with A, the letter A, to the letter E. So there's 31 clients in that small group, 31. So in a reduced timetable in mainstream schooling, I met with 5 of them. Out of not being able to go to mainstream schooling, 4 transferred to a 14 to 16 program at college. And to come out of mainstream schooling altogether was 14. So that's 14 out of 31. That's nearly half. Out of school for less than 12 months, I had 2. Out of school for more than 12 months, but less than 2 years, I had 6. So that's 6 clients of mine with a surname beginning with A right through to E over the last year. 6 of them have not been in school for over a year, but less than 2 years. Out of all of those 31, only 2 have gone to a specialist school as a transfer from mainstream to specialist. And out of a possible 31, 7 of those clients who are already at a specialist school have had to decrease their day to a reduced timetable. Now that in itself is quite mind-blowing, because if we were to do this nationally, even though our young people get transferred to a specialist school, there is no finite guarantee they are going to be attending school Monday to Friday, 9 to 4 or 9 to 3. And it gets worse because when we took the look of that small segment, out of 31, 14 had had a mental health breakdown. And out of that 31, 6 are currently having to have an EOTIS package. They are considered the lucky ones of being successful with having an EOTIS package.
What is EOTIS, Lavinia?
So EOTIS is where they are requesting, invariably through tribunal, of having specialist tutors teaching at home. But it's not necessarily academic subjects, and for quite a few, it's very much steering away from the academics to thinking about learning that doesn't look like learning, you know, say, for example, equine school or trampolining, going out to do forest school. All of these are very much more natural activities, play sort of like based activities, but heavily ensconced learning sort of hidden in and amongst it, which is great. And the reason for that is because, and again, I know we'll talk about this a bit later, but the reason for that is because these children invariably have been so traumatized from a school environment that the very word association or the understanding that they would be expected to go into a school environment has their anxieties just literally ricochet that they can't entertain or cope with the idea of doing it. So the EOTIS package is really for those incredibly complex cases in a desperate bid for the local authority to try and get these young people back into some sort of education. And whilst the local authority perceive EOTIS to be a very temporary measure, invariably my perspective as a clinician is by the time these individuals have got to EOTIS, the chances of these young people ever returning to a school environment, whether that's mainstream, attached unit or a specialist unit, is probably zero.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that it's an alternative for families that are ravaged, you know, with that whole school anxiety.
Yeah.
I mean, what you said hit a point with me, because my own son, my youngest, he became so phobic, it seemed. You know, the fear of going to school was so extreme that we couldn't even be in the vicinity of the building without him having panic, you know, feeling physically, me seeing and him feeling panic. And that's why education other than at school is a key thing for parents to look at if they know that school isn't foreseeably manageable. You know, and it is an adjustment, but it's there, and I don't think there are many families that are aware of it, to be honest.
Yeah. And what do you make of the 14 out of 31? I mean, that's quite a number, isn't it, to have a mental health breakdown? And the thing that I am a little bit perturbed by is that the minute that somebody knows, and I'm trying to explain it from a professional opinion, the minute a professional knows that a young person has a diagnosis of autism, they immediately say, oh, it's an autistic burnout. And I get really cross with that, because this isn't an autistic burnout. This is anxiety related. This is mental health. So, you know, if we were talking about an autistic burnout, what I would be expecting to see is a young person who's, you know, pretty frazzled by the end of the day. Only we refer to that as a meltdown or a shutdown. But, you know, they're a bit burnt out by it. And if it was a bit of a burnout, you'd expect to be able to go on a little bit of a holiday, have a bit of a break, and get your energy reserves back up and boing, bounce back into it. But when you've had a mental health breakdown, I don't think so. That's, you know, months of recovery, and that's not allowable. So when we've got 14 cases that have come to me, that's quite high, isn't it? But then that would feed back into your stats as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, autistic people do have a high prevalence of mental ill health. They're concurrent in 70% of autistic adults. I mean, that's a huge number. You know, I got that from a recent psychologist article. 66% of those autistic people have experienced suicidal ideation. Again, you know, that's when we know with our young people that if they're saying they can't cope, I don't want to live anymore, things that are really hard to hear as a parent, that is just their way of saying everything is too much. It's all too overwhelming. And, you know, my own son said, I cannot cope with school. I just simply cannot cope with school. And please, Mum, you know, he begged me to not go to school. And I pushed for a while, but I saw his deterioration. And it took, like you say, it took a couple of years, to be honest, for him to recover. It was a very slow process. And all the schools want to do, sadly, is to get you back in as quickly as possible. I mean, when my son's attendance plummeted to 50% when he was in year 6, instead of getting an education psychologist on board, which is what I was asking for from the school, they put me in touch with SBS, which is about behaviour and support, getting the young person, in this case my son, back into school with a sort of build-up of tolerance. So, you know, the first visit was an hour, the second visit at lunchtime, you know, different times of the day, building up to one day and so on. But they very much wanted him back in school when he really didn't want to be in school at all. And this is the pressure that parents and families are under, is, you know, it comes at you from the school. Well, they must attend, and we can only support you and your child if they're attending.
Now, just going back to this MP, Zadhim, the Secretary of State, in that same letter, he stated that part of the identifiable school lack of attendance was because those that were vulnerable, but those that had mental health issues. Now, we've already identified, haven't we, that we've got an awful lot of young people on our books who are experiencing mental ill health, but in some cases a mental health breakdown. So if the schools are then saying, right, for you and your son, okay, we're not going to do the psychologist route, we're not going to go down that route, no, we're going to go and get the policeman, we're going to get SBAS involved. I mean, I've experienced it twice now in the last 4 weeks. I've had 2 clients on my books, one where I had to do a crisis contact of to the school, you know, this is not acceptable, this young person is highly suicidal, and what are you going to do about it, and what are your experiences and understanding around mental health and autism? And all they could come back with is, we're very experienced in mental health and autism, but the agenda was very much about, you're going to get this person back into school, and it's like, that is not going to work. And the other client I had is, again, I thankfully saw them earlier in the year and then did a reassessment in the last week. And it was shocking, the deterioration of a young person. But still, the school was saying to the young person, you need to go home and you need to change your attitude. You need to change your behavior, without any understanding or any compassion to validating how difficult it is for the young people. So already we've kind of got this angle and understanding that, you know, you can say to the school leaders as the Secretary of State, right, we've got to get the top agenda is to get everybody back in school, bums on seats, because you're going to be monitored by the Ofsted. But yet there is still no understanding about, well, how are you going to support a young person with a breakdown of mental health? And how are you going to support the needs if actually what you're doing to a young person is kind of quite traumatic? You know, how is that change going to come about? And again, I think it's back to what you said earlier about, you know, it's not just one way. You know, there are different reasons why a young person is struggling to go into school.
Yeah.
So now I know you did a poll recently with the lovely Sen Ninja. Do you want to talk about that? Because that was very interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the lovely Sarah, she just put out a poll last week on her community group page, Sen Ninja, and she asked how many of those parents thought that anxiety was such an issue that it was likely to cause refusal, and 59 parents got back to her about that. 90 of her families have autism as a reality. 57 have ADHD diagnosis, 31 have a PDA diagnosis, and 29 dyslexia diagnosis. Often we see that dyslexia, ADHD and anxiety go together.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah, and or anxiety and PDA, I mean, they're hand in hand. You know, I have a lot of knowledge around demand avoidance, and I just know it to be chronic anxiety most of the time. So revealing in that, you know, 59 of those families that got back to her, you know, she has got a busy life, and, you know, I'm sure lots of other families are very busy and can't be doing polls. But yes, it's still revealing in that, you know, there are families out there whose children are not school refusing. I hate to use that word, but, you know, that's what it's called. But they're likely to, because they're probably saying every morning, I don't want to go to school. They're possibly having a panic attack, an anxiety attack about getting ready for school. They could well be having a panic attack in the car on the way to school, or on the bus, or when they get to the school gate. I mean, these are things that I witnessed myself with my own child, you know, how it just took over. The anxiety absolutely took over. And And I got met with the classic response was, he's fine once he's in school.
Yeah.
And I was left with that hollow feeling hearing that, which was, but you have no idea what it took for him and for me as his mum to get him through that door, because it was immense.
Yeah.
And so whenever I communicated that to both the schools, the primary and the secondary that he started at, the teachers, and I use that in a broad word, they seemed to think that it was my anxiety, because when they observed him, they would say, he's smiling, he's okay, you know, he's in his lessons, he's not behaving badly, he's a good boy. And what I've learned about my son, and of course is true for a lot of families with autism, that our young people mask and they camouflage and they only ever want to fit in.
Yeah.
And when you're under that extreme pressure to conform, to do as you're told, to be in that environment where there's all this expectation and constant demand coming at you, that, you know, of course he's going to comply, of course he's going to try and be with his friends, because he wants to be with his friends, he wants to be okay, but he can't be. And that's a sad fact that I see time and time again, certainly when I was looking through the Not Fine in School posts and Send Ninja community posts, that lots of parents are told, you're too anxious, you're overprotective, you're stressing out, and it's your stress that's making your child stressed. When actually, you know, our stress is because our children are so stressed.
And it's not something we're going to dive in today, but I know it's going to come up in future programs. But I think this is where it goes down a very horrible rabbit hole, where teachers then start to infer that the parent is fabricating the illness on behalf of the child. And I've seen parents in school meetings just looking terrified that they're not going to be validated, they're not going to be listened to. And even the suggestion, like there was an email that was sent across to me from a school to a parent that suggested that the reason why they were keeping their child off school was so that they could actually prove the need for having a tribunal. So if that's not a very underhand way of saying you are the problem, this is your doing, you're fabricating all of this. And the reason why that was asserted was because the teacher had watched the child all day, and I'm not joking about that. That's what they put in the email. I've watched your child all day and they were happy and said they were fine. Now, nobody's going to be watching somebody all day, not for a moment, particularly when you've got 29 other people in the class. That's impossible. So the very projection that, you know, I've watched your child, this is you as a parent, is really not pleasant. And again, this is just one parent. You are another parent who's experienced that you are the issue, you're creating the anxiety. But when you have given birth to this young person and you know what they're like when they're relaxed and calm and engaging, to see them terrified terrifies a parent. Because of course we know, particularly with ADHD and PDA, particularly if you've got a young person who has the meltdowns rather than the shutdowns, when they are in that tizzy moment of being highly impulsive, they are a huge risk of doing something really silly, you know, running out in front of cars, running away from school, trying to get away from that sheer terror of anxiety. So it's a much, much bigger problem, isn't it? It's not just the school accusing parents incorrectly, but they're also not learning how to recognize states of anxiety, particularly for those quiet, young people who are just terrified of getting into trouble, would rather melt into the background or the ground, just disappear. And none of that is taken into account, is it? So, there's a lot going on there. And obviously we've had COVID, and I know you want to talk about this as well, because you've done research for this as well. COVID has brought in its own issues, hasn't it? So maybe we should move on to that.
Yes, I mean, the 38% increase in elective home education is a big figure, and I'm on a special needs home education parent forum. It's an email format, and I've read so many posts, emails of families debating for long periods of time last year, and still some of them debating now if they deregister their child because their child is so ill. They've probably got chronic illness, physical disability that affects their immunity. There's all sorts of fears around COVID impacting people that do have these health conditions, and that is certainly a factor, because in the poll that was done, there was a high proportion of people that cited health concern as being the reason, a smaller portion being dissatisfaction with school, but still a significant portion. And also health is broken down into anxiety or physical. So yes, the anxiety was a factor as well. And
I suppose the thing that I was quite intrigued by COVID lockdowns was that for a lot of young people who were experiencing particularly the sensory issues with their autism, the very fact that they didn't have to go to school was just a huge respite. And equally, those with ADHD who were never allowed to move freely between or in classrooms, although they were struggling at home, but they had a better chance of recovery and respite because they could move freely in between, obviously, answering questions online. So the impact of then having to go back to school really hit home about, hang on a minute, our child has not been experiencing the levels of anxiety. So for me, that aspect of COVID has been hugely powerful because, of course, it's been identifying, just how bad our schools at recognizing and being able to be very proactive in how to support young people. And I also keep hearing about how the schools will offer young people nurturing programs, but it's not addressing the needs. Quite clearly, it's not addressing the needs to support those young people on a day-to-day basis with their levels of anxiety. And but again, it's a big area, isn't it? Because it's not just one thing, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's the analogy of the iceberg, isn't it? That so often we hear of this tip of the iceberg effect, that underneath it all there's so many different factors. And if you just take one person with an ADHD diagnosis, anxiety is just at the core of a lot of their processing, that learning cannot take place if you're in an environment that makes you anxious, or if you're with a person, a teacher, or a peer, if you're experiencing bullying, for example, that is putting you in that stress state. It's a neurological state, a state that any person has no control over. It sort of takes over the cognition, it takes over the learning part of the brain. So if you're in a home that is well equipped, you have parents that are understanding that you need your space to do your study, you have your own device, You have headphones to concentrate and avoid distraction. You have plenty of nice snacks. You know, the perfect environment is the home, because it's one-on-one, you know, with your teacher on your laptop. You don't have to go anywhere. You can be in your slippers.
And your onesie.
Or your onesie. You can have access to everything that you need in terms of your self-care. And you can do what you can do when you can do it. You know, it's about flexibility. And also there isn't the pressure to conform. You know, you're yourself, you're in your safe space at home. And so I guess a lot of families, certainly with autism and ADHD being a factor, they've seen a big improvement in their child's anxiety being at home more. And then, you know, having that adjustment to make about going back into the school environment has been huge for them, really huge. And, you know, school isn't all bad. You know, there are the children that have really struggled with the inability to see their friends and to hang out and to have that routine. You know, some people really like routine, having that structure, and home is a chaotic place. So it just depends on the person. It's so individual as to what any one child needs. And if a young person has the intelligence and can cope with the amount of schoolwork, then that is less likely, sadly, in this day and age, than the child that can't cope with the amount of information coming at you, because, you know, it's information overload. And it's also this mentality of hit the ground running. You know, as soon as you're in school, bam, you know, you're in school with a thud, and there's no time to pause, because it's, you know, certainly in the secondary mainstream, it's one lesson after another. And so when play is disrupted, you know, as some schools had to adjust to their play times and separate year groups and so on, that had a big impact on social networks. So there's so many factors about, you know, whether homeschooling is right for you or not. It isn't for everybody, but nor is school for everybody.
So we don't want it all to be doom and gloom, because that's not the essence of the M word. We're very much about, you know, we've identified the issues, the problems, but we also are very keen to find the solutions. So we've got 10 minutes left. Well, just over 10 minutes left. In fact, 13, if you want to be accurate. Sue, I know you've put a lot of thought into this as well. So should we think about possible solutions then?
Certainly. I mean, when you're talking about autistic young people, neurodivergent young people, whether it's ADHD, dyslexia, then the key is to embrace the diversity. And I have tapped into so many wonderful people out there who have produced books and articles, all sorts of helpful things to help me in my job as mum to a child who is neurodivergent, and to think, you know, where is my child at? What can I do to help support my child? And a big factor has been in seeing where he finds his enjoyment. You know, what is his interest or interests, and to have that connection with him, to think instead of dismissing his needs, you know, perhaps because I'm a bit stressed myself, I've got things to do, and here's my child, you know, needing my attention. Instead of me thinking, oh, you know, not today or not now, thinking, okay, this is where he's at right now. If he's in a slump, curled up in the corner of his bedroom, not really communicating with me, how can I engage him? And so connection is key. I have just found myself adjusting to what he can cope with on any one day, and that is different every day. And to think, where can I find the playfulness, you know, to make it light and funny, you know, to distract from the doom and gloom, because, you know, he has been sat in a really sad place for quite some time, because he's taken on the feeling of failure because school didn't work out, or perhaps college isn't going to work out. So I have looked for advice from various experts, one of them being Anat Baniel, who is a wonderful woman who uses Feldenkrais method. And so I've learned with my boy especially that sometimes it's about the body, it's about the being in your body and grounding yourself. And that can put people off. You can think, oh, it's a bit woo-woo, it's a bit Buddhist. But I'm, you know, far from a Buddhist. I embrace the need for mindfulness, certainly. And so it's about mindful movement and making positive movement with your body, you know, to find comfort and to also expel some energy, you know, if that's perhaps needed, if perhaps restlessness is a factor, fidgetiness, you know, if you notice that your child is hyper and, you know, and they can't seem to sit still, that to think, okay, how can we get this energy out in a positive way? Another person that I found useful was Victoria Honeyborn, who is autistic, and she's written a book, The Neurodiverse Classroom. And she has said that it's important for school staff to not assume that what makes one person happy, one child happy, doesn't make all children happy. And for autistic people, young people, it's not always going to be happiness found on the playground with lots of people in large groups joining in games. That some autistic people actually need the time by themselves to feel okay, and time in between doing activities to recover, to process, because time is often a factor in processing. You know, some of our young people have real delay in their processing. And to think, you know, rest is important in between activity. Another person that I've turned to a lot over the years, who has now sadly departed, is Sir Ken Robinson. And he's motivated me, you know, in looking at myself and what gets my juices flowing, because I think of myself as a creative person. And he has talked a lot, you know, TED Talks and in his books, about finding your element, finding your creative flow. And that can be so many different things for different people. And you don't have to be neurodivergent to understand that, you know, that there are moments that we lose ourselves, you know, and that's being in the flow. And that's really important when you're dealing with anxiety all the time, is to just have that off switch, to be so focused on something that brings you pleasure, that helps you express yourself, whether that's music making, drawing, dancing, you know, to have that in your life is absolutely key, and that creativity is just as important as literacy.
Absolutely.
And
what I'm picking up from that then is thinking about, you know, for good mental health and a reduction in anxiety, is first of all identifying what are our strengths individually rather than collectively in a school. but also then encouraging that strength to keep shining through. And I think this is perhaps where the nurturing programs in school are not able to embrace this throughout the school day, because of course we're herding everybody into a room and you will all sit and listen and you will all learn in the same way. Whereas, of course, we know very differently that the autistic person and the autistic person with ADHD is just quite frankly not going to be able to learn in that way. And so whilst you've identified that your son identified feelings of failure, those that are neurotypical would just get on with it. But in actual fact, we need to be embracing the differences and embracing the strengths of all our young people, not just the neurotypicals who are very academic and very capable of coping within a time-pressured environment. And that actually we need to be embracing our actors. We need to be embracing the dancers, the engineers, as much as other individuals who are very happy doing very academic stuff. And for me personally, with my doctorate was very much about looking at mental health and self-esteem and the cause of mental ill health. And for me, for sure, I am absolutely 100% convinced by this, that if our self-esteem is ruptured, it is very difficult to stop mental ill health. And in order to have our young people recover from a mental health breakdown, we need to remind schools that it's not just like somebody having a bit of a burnout. They just need a couple of weeks off. It's very much about how long does it take for somebody to recover from, say, for example, a broken leg, or for having childhood asthma. You know, you can't just do it in 2 weeks. It takes time. And if you have had or experienced a mental health breakdown, that means that your mental health is weakened. And so therefore, you are more at risk of having a further breakdown if things are not put in place to get it right. So when I'm having these very cross conversations with schools about, you don't get this, you're not understanding this, and they're just throwing it back in my face going, well, you know, the agenda, you know, what we need to do is to get people back into school. It's like, well, you're going the wrong way about this, because you're not going to. Well, what you will do is you are going to be wholly responsible for further mental health deterioration and potential breakdowns. And that then leads to the risk. So, you know, if we could be very productive in identifying our young people's strengths, you know, allowing them to be creative, that would be so different, wouldn't it? Really different.
Yes, and earlier the better, of course,
Earlier
as
the
well. Early intervention. And
where
also,
would that early intervention come from, I wonder? But the parents, professional parents.
I mean, if there's one thing that I just want to reassure, you know, in all this very, very negative situation that we find ourselves, is, you know, for us as parents to hold on to our curiosity and our love of our children, because that is where the power comes from. You know, we know our children best, and we are our children's experts, especially when they're young, and until our children become teenagers and can advocate for themselves, just like my son is now doing. But you know, 4 or 5 years ago, when he started to have school attendance difficulties, he didn't have a voice. He didn't feel like he had a voice. And that is where we can step in as parents and professionals in the supportive capacity, that we start where our children are at. You know, we see where they're at on that day, and that is what we communicate to the professionals, that there's no quick fix, that they need time to recover and heal, and that can only happen with nurture, in the form of compassion, true compassion and kindness and gentleness and empathy. You know, if we ourselves as adults in a job had a mental breakdown, or we suffered a loss, or, you know, a traumatic event, we would not be expected to go into work in 2 weeks' time, happy as Larry, you know, in a breeze. It just won't happen.
No. Sue, you've done it amazingly well. We've come literally to the end and we're skidding to a halt because we've had so much information from you. So I am so thankful for you and your input, and thank you so much for joining the M word, because you can see how valuable your contribution has been today. Hugely valuable. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Sue has named me as the salt of the earth in our Unearthing program. My job is to find a note to end on, and I am struggling, if I can be brutally honest, because of course Sue has done an amazing job at identifying so much information, statistics, both from the M word, but also from outside with our lovely Sun Ninja community, as well as other further afields. And let's not forget, you know, places like the BBC, the charities, everybody's pulling together data, and it's so important that we continue to do that. But I suppose the key thing here for me is going back to the letter from the Secretary of State, is not addressing mental health directly, or mental ill health. Not addressing that really is a bit of a problem for so many of our families. And we know that we have to make a change. And believe me, this is one avenue that we feel very strongly, Sue and I, that, you know, this is a way of giving you guys information, because the more information we have, the more knowledge we have, the more knowledge we share, the greater we are empowered for us to be able to start making a change. And when we link up with other very passionate researchers and parents, what we find is that we can start linking up with one another to then start being a major force, you know, because after all, if we've got 14 clients in a tiny segment out of 31 who've had a mental health breakdown, that's shocking. If we've got over 3/4 of so many young people attending mental health telephone support lines, if we've got something ridiculous like 60% are really struggling with non-attendance, that's shocking, isn't it? It's really big results. It's not just a little bit, is it? Going forward, what I would like you to think about is, we're wondering what we've got for next week. If you wanted to contact us with any ideas that you would like exploring, you can do it one of two ways. So I'm just putting on the screen now. We have, of course, the M Word Community Facebook group. You're very welcome to join us, and of course comment, but you can also email us at this. So that's info@the-m-word-cic.co.uk, or of course you can call us on our work mobile, and you will get the lovely John, who is our business manager. He probably won't be very happy that we've said that, but he'll be saying, Sue, Lavinia, in my office now. So that just leaves me to thank you so much for taking the time to watch the very first of our program, Unearthing, and we look very much forward to seeing you next week, same time, Wednesday, 12:15. Thank you, Sue. Thank you to everybody, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.